Hi everyone and welcome to our webinar today. I'm Robert Jeffrey, I'm Editor-in-Chief of Supply Management. Now, one of the real positives of the past couple of years has been the speeding up of the shift of procurement from a tactical to a strategic partner. And that inevitably means procurement teams are looking at how they automate and streamline elements of their operations. So today we are talking specifically about the benefits of strategic sourcing automation and some of the challenges that crop up during its implementation. And I am happy to welcome two expert speakers to help us delve deeper into that topic. They are Michaela Dempsey, the Senior Director of Demand Generation at Workday, and Rajiv Venkatachalapathy, the Director of Global Sourcing at Workday. Hi, Michaela and Rajiv. Thank you both for joining us today. So we're going to have a Q&A towards the end of the session, so please do share your comments and questions for the speakers at any time. We will get through as many of them as we can. You can type them in the comment section below the video. Also, don't forget the webinar is being recorded, so you can come back and watch it again or share it at a later date. Before we hear from Michaela and Rajiv, we'd like to ask you to take part in a quick poll just to find out how you currently view this topic. So there are options in the questions and comments section underneath the main video. And the question is, how would you rate the digital maturity of your sourcing and procurement practices at the moment? And the potential options there range from very mature to mature, not quite mature, or not at all mature. We're going to be revealing the results of that in a moment. So let me hand over to Michaela and Rajiv while you ponder those questions, and look forward to speaking to you again later. Michaela and Rajiv.
Thank you. As we look to take in the answers from you all on the poll, I wanted to throw up our safe harbor statement as we are a public company and always start any session that we are showing today or any day, the safe harbor statement. So have the numbers started coming in yet, Sam? Sam, on the poll, do we have the numbers? Yes. So Rajiv, how do you think the answers are going to fall out?
I think, hey, Michaela, I think many companies are going to be in the B category. I think they are digitized already, but not yet optimized, because there are digital tools and there is a good amount of sourcing and procurement that is being done. Probably it's desperate. That would be my take. It'll be interesting to see what the polls comes out to as we see it. What do you think?
What's interesting right now, it seems as if, oh, that was a shift. It seems as if it's almost even, except for D. So you're right in that the B answer came out, but just slightly ahead. It's very balanced, honestly. So 32% are mature, 36% feel they're not quite mature, and 32% not at all mature. So it's a nice balance, actually. So thank you all for participating. It's definitely very helpful for all of us here today. So let's move on to why we're here overall. And this is a spend management automation, moving procurement from tactical to strategic. And I'm really excited to have Rajiv here on the call. I don't know if any of you know Rajiv, but I wanted to share a little bit about him. I know, we had a quick introduction with Robert, but he's our head of technology sourcing and procurement at Workday. And before that, he was head of service procurement at Tesla, as well as holding supply chain roles at Google and Cisco. So I think that the audience might fill up the questions about the Tesla, self-driving car, but hopefully we'll stay on track with the sourcing overall. So let's move forward to the next slide. As we all know, that procurement took a very critical role in the enterprise when the pandemic struck. And as we all work through the challenges that continue, this unprecedented risk that has brought us to the globe, the team here at Workday reached out to Harvard to organize research to really better understand all that we all went through. So what HBR found was not a surprise to any of you as you all walked through this storm firsthand, but what Harvard found was the impact of supply, service, and general business disruptions over the last year was even more severe due to the fact that 92% of the organizations did not have robust process technology going through the pandemic. Now, we all know, like I remember very heartily having think tanks and how everyone was getting their teams on board. And without procurement and sourcing, these businesses, and I know our business, would have had some really terrible times, but you guys did an amazing job. And while no enterprise can control every external shock, business leaders can examine the weaknesses that were exposed by the pandemic to better prepare for future disruptions and use this opportunity to address the larger forces already reshaping the procurement function. In addition to some of those stats above, we know to be true that global disruptions will continue and that risks that roll from these disruptions highlight the critical role that procurement and supplier management play in an enterprise resilience. And the research is clear that procurement is changing the way forward. We saw from the previous slide how much organizations were not prepared for disruption from a spend management standpoint. However, 60% are now fast-tracking plans to upgrade and automate key functions. Additionally, an important stat here is that 86% believe that procurement is playing an influential role on their organization's recovery. And again, it was such, like through the challenges that we faced, it was such a great bonding moment with procurement and the business overall. And that procurement has exposed the procurement function, or the pandemic, has exposed the procurement function as a key pillar of the business, which we all knew, right? That's not a surprise, but there's always a nice bright spot that can come out of something like this. So more specifically, procurement plays a pivotal role in helping organizations navigate uncertainty and elevate the performance of the business. The job is not solely about eliminating waste, but reducing costs, improving efficiency, and also building stronger, better business relationships so that the business can become more competitive and increase the speed of performance. As a result, high-performing procurement teams have the opportunity to manage global networks of suppliers, embrace procurement models, and drive enterprise innovation. So we're going to move over to Rajiv, and he's going to walk through how Workday looks at this. Rajiv?
Thank you, Michaela. Let me talk about Workday's transformation story, and then I can go into some of the details about our procurement story as well. So for those of you who are not familiar with Workday, Workday was started in 2005 by Anil Bhusri and Dave Duffield around bringing enterprise applications to the cloud. In particular, the core systems of record around HR and financials. The company was built around a set of core values, starting out with employees as number one. Obviously, happy employees lead to happy customers. The other core values are customer service, integrity, fun, innovation, and profitability. The company was built around these central core values. Fast forward 16 years now, Workday is a global company with 50 plus offices, 12,500 employees, and 4.32 billion in revenues. Workday has been named one of the world's most ethical companies and now has products besides HR and financials and includes spend management, payroll, planning, and procurement. I talked about how Workday has evolved. Now let me talk about how procurement has evolved at Workday. Procurement used to be decentralized. There were different processes depending on which business unit you were in. There was no standardization, and it was very hard to track the impact of procurement. And we were not leveraging economies of scale. About 2 years ago, the Global Procurement Office was formed, and we started the transition to a centralized procurement model. Sourcing is part of the Global Procurement Office, and we have 3 branches of sourcing: services sourcing, technology sourcing, and procurement operations. The services sourcing includes everything to do with corporate services, from marketing, events, talent acquisition, mobility, and travel. Technology sourcing team includes everything to do with software, hardware, and cloud sourcing, and cloud is both public and private. Procurement operations includes concierge desk, contracts team, and purchasing team. The sourcing team is structured by spend categories, and each of the sourcing managers own their category strategy, the supplier selection, ongoing relationship management, running the sourcing events, and leading the contract negotiations. So this slide shows, on the left-hand side, it shows how it was prior to the transformation that was started as part of the GPO. You can see a diverse set of tools, and probably many of you are familiar with it. There are disparate tools, and each of the tools don't talk to each other. And there is no history of why, what, when, or how a certain thing was sourced or procured. You don't have any of those things. Prior to the transformation, we leveraged a couple of third-party tools. And as of late 2018, we started using Scout RFP, now called Workday Strategic Sourcing, for managing sourcing events and pipeline. And there was another third-party tool for contract repository and Workday Procurement for P2P, anything from procure to pay. And none of these systems were integrated, and which led to a lot of manual work. Most importantly, our requesters, our business partners, lost visibility to the process, and the process was indeed a black box to them. As part of the transformation, we made a conscious decision to consolidate our tools and leverage Workday Spend Management for our source to procure process. Our new workflow takes our business partners to a central landing page for GPO, and the concierge desk that is part of procurement operations team processes the intake and decides the most efficient path for resolution. It could be a self-service option like punch outs, or it could be a fast track, or it could involve sourcing, who then goes and helps out the business partners to get the best pricing and contractual terms. This slide shows the timeline for the transformation. Workday Strategic Sourcing, or Scout, as it was known at that time, was identified as the solution we needed that was comprehensive in covering our sourcing activities and could be quickly implemented. It was truly flexible and configurable to our needs while having an easy interface. We started with implementing two of the solutions, sourcing events and the pipeline. That was completed and went live in November 2019. We also knew that as we continue to transform our team, Scout or WSS would be able to grow with us due to its configurability. Then in December 2019, Workday acquired Scout. At this point, we started focusing on implementing other functionality, and in 3 months, we were able to launch Intake. Previously, the team had multiple procurement entry points for our stakeholders to engage us due to historically being separate, disparate teams within each business unit. This confused the requesters and often resulted in sourcing being bypassed. Intake created a single point of entry and engagement for the GPO, which provided our stakeholders better process clarity, visibility to the projects, enhanced the quality of data and efficiencies all around the procurement process. This resulted in a 49% increase in project volume flowing to GPO compared to the previous year. And thankfully, WSS gave us the capability to manage the increase in workload. Even today, we continue to improve our intake process by creating simple and customized advanced intake forms, allowing stakeholders to better engage our team, GPO and sourcing teams, while providing the details we need to support their request. Now, after maturing the intake, we changed our focus to making Workday Strategic Sourcing the official repository for our supplier contracts. The supplier contracts had been managed, as I mentioned before, a third-party tool, but we need the efficiencies and the simplicity by no longer needing to access a separate system and for routing and for storing contracts. By January of this year, we migrated all our supplier contracts from that third-party tool into WSS. It took us about a month, and we migrated more than 20,000 contracts. And additionally, efficiencies provided tremendous time savings and better visibility into contract routing stages by making it flow seamlessly, while allowing us to stay in one system from stakeholder request to contract completion. We estimate roughly we gained about 5 minutes per contract, or we expect about 4,000 plus contract transactions in 2021. So resulting about like 340 to 350 hours of savings that we gained by efficiencies and just by centralizing everything under WSS. With that, I want to hand it back to Michaela.
Sorry about that. I have a puppy and you could hear him in the background, so apologies. So with Workday Strategic Sourcing, you get a best-in-class solution that empowers sourcing leaders to collaborate with the business and have complete transparency and deliver the most impactful outcomes when engaging with suppliers. Workday Strategic Sourcing helps digitize the entire source-to-contract process, starting with stakeholder intake, as you can see over on the far left, to seamlessly allow procurement to partner with business stakeholders and establish a demand for the sourcing initiatives. From there, you can manage and prioritize your sourcing pipeline to ensure that organizations are focusing on the right projects and align those strategic priorities with the business and within finance. This then flows to the execution of the sourcing project, which encompasses the setup and publication of RFXs, events, establishing bidding activity with suppliers at scale, and determining the optimal award scenario. Once the supplier has been awarded, you can establish contracts, work with stakeholders, review and approvals, and process in the digital signatures. And if a new supplier is onboarded, you can manage all the onboarding, data collecting activities within the platform so that the supplier can be utilized. And finally, the Workday Strategic Sourcing solution allows you to close the loop on process through performance management activities, including quarterly business reviews and development plans. It's also important to mention that all the data is within the platform and can be tracked and reported on. Additionally, conversations within that might have been held in the past via email are all also included in the platform so that it's easy for anyone to go back at any time and review decisions that were made or questions that were asked. And if we take a broader picture, if we step back a little bit, you can see that Workday has a full spend management picture overall. We provide products covering the full source to pay process. With these spend management offerings, Workday now supports over 1,200 customers worldwide and counting. What we have found with that strategic sourcing plays a pivotal role for the procurement team and what's focused on identifying and managing relationships with the right suppliers along with the right stakeholder engagements to better partner with the individual lines of business. The ability to understand project pipeline, source, contract, and onboard strategic suppliers can be carried downstream to procure to pay. The moving to the right of the diagram, Workday procurement, inventory, expenses, and AP all ensure the organization can carry out the spend transactions to the most efficient and cost-effective manner, from requisitioning approvals to purchase orders and receipts, as well as inventory transactions, expenses, and finally invoice processing and payment. So I'm going to hand it back to Rajiv to kind of close up on some of the key points and best practices.
Thank you, Michaela. So, as I mentioned, there are multiple benefits for using Workday Strategic Sourcing, but I want to highlight the key ones. One is obviously it's a single source of truth. You have one-stop shop for all your source to procure activities. And WSS also has all the relationship between a project, a supplier, a stakeholder, RFQ event, and the final contract. All your why, who, what, how, for any of these sourcing activities is all stored in WSS. So it makes it extremely easy for you to go back, especially as you can imagine, organizations, people change, but if you want to go back and look at it, why something was done, then you can easily look at it. And it's integrated with the contracts, so you don't need to jump off to a different module. And it's easy to search and report. You can build customized dashboards, reports, filters based on your categories that you want to manage. And you also can set your own reminders and notification that gives you easy visibility. It's a great collaboration tool. And again, there are many benefits, but I do want to highlight only these key ones, primarily because I think in a nutshell, the single source of truth and just the collaboration tool to easily search and report is fundamentally key for any digitization to be completely optimized and helping the sourcing folks. With that, I would like to thank you for listening, how we transform procurement at Workday. And I will turn it over to Robert for any Q&A.
Thank you very much. Thank you both for a really fascinating presentation. Really interesting to hear about your own experiences in this area. Now, we've got some questions coming in, which I'm going to put to Rajiv and Michaela. If you have questions, though, there's time to ask them, so please do send them through now. Let me just start off, though, by asking you maybe a little bit more about some of the challenges perhaps that you faced, Rajiv, when you went through the process of digitization, and some of the challenges that maybe you hear from other people when they're doing likewise. What are those challenges? How do you advise people to overcome them?
Good question. So obviously I often hear that there are too many tools. We have used this tool, we have used that tool, and they don't talk to each other. And when you introduce a new tool, the question is like, why do we need to use this tool? How is this going to be more effective, right? And the change management is going to be a central part of any kind of digitization. And if you want to make something that is centralized and a single source of truth, you have to walk them through the process. And that's a tough one. As change management, as you can imagine, it is tough. And you have to take them through the process through roadshows, office hours, and configure in a way that's easy to the customers, which is also the sourcing and procurement folks, because they need to use it on a day-to-day basis, right? So I think the key challenges are when you introduce the tool, you have to have a good change management process in place, and also have, like we had, when we introduced WSS, we had our own Slack channels for answering any questions. We also had office hours, we had GPO roadshows, and we also started engaging with each of the partners. Actually, our concierge desk did a great job. They started setting up calls initially to field any questions, walk them through the process, spend time. And especially when you have a global team, you have to make sure that everyone is supported. And those are the key challenges, and that's how we actually configured and advised.
Thank you very much. So a question that's come in here, and I think this is quite a broad question, but it probably gets very much to the heart of what we're talking about, which is, how do you determine what to automate and what not to automate?
That is a good question, because it's a fine balance. Because oftentimes we try to automate any of the redundant tasks that we want, like that is not actually adding, and you can increase process efficiencies. But I would say for each of these cases, there is no one size fits all solution for all these things. You have to take a look at your own use cases. And we started looking at it and seeing that which will be a low hanging fruit that we can address, and which we can actually go and automate, and it's going to provide us efficiencies. For instance, I said that we moved the contracts repository from a third party tool to internally at WSS, right? If you want to take that question, obviously the third party tool was doing great. We could go in there and get it, but the ease and functionality of us to migrate from one system to another was not there. So for us to bring that in, and WSS offered this contracts module as well, and that provided the complete end-to-end solution. And it provides an easy way for us to search, report, and also keep track of the history, why something was done. Especially as many sourcing and procurement professionals will acknowledge, we want to know when a contract is being renewed and when it's coming for expiration, and why it was done, who was working on it, what are the details of those. Having everything in that single place made a lot of sense. And for us to invest our time, as I mentioned, it took us a month for us to migrate the contracts over. And we migrated 20,000 contracts and into WSS, and that helped us quite a bit. So I think, to answer your question, I think it really depends on the use case, and you have to address based on the inefficiencies that you want to optimize and where you can get the best bang for the buck. If you continue to try to automate everything, you have to invest resources, and the change management is another piece. So you have to identify those things, and for each business organization, it's going to be different.
Thank you very much. So a question here about what was your implementation timeline from business case to go live? What can you tell us about that?
So I have been with Workday for about 2.5 years. When I came on board, that's when we started kind of feeling the product WSS or Scout at that time. It took us probably about 9 months for us to actually get a good handle of it, which was probably November of 2019 is when we went live internally as well. Again, as you mentioned, as I mentioned before, there is a change management that needs to happen. You cannot just say that we are introducing a tool and we are transitioning all these things over to this, right? So we need to have that in place. And we had very good leadership support as well for us to make the transition. So it took us some time. But once you had the WSS, it was faster for us to implement certain modules. As I mentioned, the contract module took us like a month to actually go into it and how to integrate it. So it takes a shorter period of time when it's actually an integrated solution. But probably when you're introducing a new solution, it could take longer. Again, the reason why probably it took us 9 months, it's a cloud-based, it's a SaaS platform. It probably could be shorter for certain organization, longer for certain organization. It depends also on what kind of tools that you already have in place and what you're migrating from. So a lot depends on that. So I wouldn't say you should harp more than as a set example, what we took, but it could change. But for us, it took roughly about, I would say, 9 months into it.
Thank you very much. And a second part to that question was how you convinced the business to invest. Now, I guess that's relevant both in terms of your own organization and again in the general principles of implementing any major piece of software like this.
So I'll actually take this one. And it's kind of interesting, Robert. Honestly, we were really blessed as Scout having so many wonderful customers, and one of the rounds of financing that we had, Workday stepped in and became a strategic investor, and started to implement and use the product overall, and then obviously ended up acquiring us. So I it was exciting because they became a customer first and then an investor, and then obviously acquired us. But in Workday's unique case, I think it's maybe a little bit different than a standard organization. We have large companies like a Philip Morris that has over 500 sourcing professionals using the product worldwide, and have implemented in roughly 3 months or so. But it honestly depends on, as Rajiv said, you have to have your plan together, and then how you're going to bring it out to your organization overall.
Thank you very much. So keep your questions coming in. Plenty of time to put them to Rajiv and Michaela. A question here: how do you recommend best handling training for your stakeholders or business partners in transitions like this, particularly when teams purchase infrequently?
Michaela, you want to take it, or I can take it?
I can talk to some of the customers that we've had. So I've seen some great rollouts from various different companies. So Lending Tree, for example, did a whole. They did a 5 session webinar series where they invited different segments of the business to roll it out. They worked with their stakeholders to begin with, so really organize the intake form, so they spoke their language, if it was marketing or IT or HR. And so they rolled these parts and pieces out, because the beauty of the product itself is not about just putting something out to RFP. We all know that if you're looking at a 3 or 5 year contract, you're not going to be going out to RFP all the time. The beauty is that you've got this pipeline and this organization. You can see the suppliers, you can see the decisions. the finance can come in and look at how the business is organized. And if you want to push a project forward or pull it back, what does that contract really mean? In the pandemic, we had a customer in Australia that was able to use a supplier management function and be able to go out to over 1,200 suppliers every time the law changed in Australia on requirements regarding the pandemic. And it was something that cut time down, where they used to do an email to all the suppliers. They could send it out. They had an easy way to track and organize all the accepted changes to the COVID protocols and get that done with, it sounds silly, but a touch of a button, right? And then they could easily analyze what had come back or not come back. So once something's digitized, it's not about going just to your RFX, but it's the full life cycle. It's doing the scorecarding. It's all those other parts and pieces that are in the product that you can easily collaborate with your stakeholder, with finance, the business, the CEO, and all of this was so critical for people, as we know, when we hit the pandemic, being able to just easily pull up contracts, have conversations, and look at the reports of where really the spend is.
Thank you very much, Rajiv. Do you have any thoughts on implementation at all?
To add to that point, when we actually rolled it out to some of our suppliers for getting some of the security risk questionnaire and even the RFX and everything, many of the suppliers actually had already used Scout RFP, and it was easy onboarding. It wasn't as tough. And those who hadn't used it also, when we actually sent it out, they found it easier for them to actually fill it. It's all easier for them rather than doing a transaction through email or spreadsheets or sending it something. It was all in one. So they started realizing the benefit pretty quickly. It wasn't as difficult as it is. On the internal business stakeholders, how that transforms, again, it was part of the change management, the road shows and the office hours that we kept. Based on that we were able to take it.
Rajiv, I know when we were planning for this, and I know this wasn't one of the questions, but I like to ask people what their favorite part of the product is. And I know you had shared during our dry run. And so I would love for you to share that again, if you could, because it was one that I was pretty thrilled about. Sure.
I really love the DNA part. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the dynamic negotiation analysis feature in Scout or WSS. Anyone who is a sourcing professional, actually, we want to go and bid it out, ideally, with many suppliers, right? You go through a reverse auction, you do some kind of RFX, and all these can be tracked. The best part of that is in WSS, it actually provides you like a picture means 1,000 words, right? It's equivalent to that. It actually shows you exactly how the bids that are coming back stack against each other. And even if you have like 20 or 30 SKUs, it actually shows by each of those SKUs what is the optimal solution that you need to go with. And it gives you a recommendation. If you want to down select them from, like, let's say, initial bid for 10 suppliers, and then you down select it like 3 or 4, you pretty much know on which are the SKUs and which is going to have the biggest impact you want to go after. So I think, again, there are many features in WSS which I'm actually thrilled about. I can go on and on, but I think the DNA really got my attention when I started using it, actually back in early part of 2019, because it's extremely useful. As I mentioned, suppliers can just respond. You can actually publish a timeline. We can actually extend the timeline. We can actually put in your questionnaire, answer any kind of queries that you can do along with this DNA. That actually is a great feature set, in my opinion.
And I believe, I'm not 100% sure, but I believe you can send in just line item questions too. So if you were thrilled overall with something, you can poke right in on one area that might seem to be a bit outside the norm.
Yes, you can. And then you can actually drill into each of those details. And the other part of this collaboration is, I can go on and on this. Other part of this collaboration is you can actually invite your business stakeholders and they can actually look at it themselves. So it's not that when you're talking to your engineering partners, it's not like sourcing is taking the decision just based on cost or something, but you can actually look at how they have responded. Each supplier has responded as well. They have a part to play in this. So it's a collaboration tool. And along with that, even individual messaging for each one of those SKUs, the supplier can respond. No one else is going to see it. So that's another feature. I think it's very useful.
And the thing that's exciting about that too, if I recall, is that you can pull in older contracts and compare it against. And I know we didn't, when I went to the left to right, when I went through the product suite, and it's a part of the product that's, I find it's a quiet part of the product that doesn't have a big, doesn't have jazz hands, but as Rajiv had pointed out how much he liked it, I really wanted to bring it forward because it's not, it really gets into the guts, I think, of what you want in a tool, but not something, generally speaking, we, rush out and talk about. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, that is fair to say. And even if you go into the contracts module, right, one of the way we have configured and how WSS works is, you actually have a parent and child relationship. If you have a global company or global supplier that you're dealing with, you have one master agreement and you have probably 20, 30, or even hundreds of amendments and SOWs. How do you track each one relates to one another? So you have a parent-child relationship and you can easily track that. So and then you know which are the ones that are actually expiring, what are the contract dates and stuff. So it's an easy way for you to do that. And since, as I mentioned, our sourcing is based on, our organization is, we have divided based on spend categories. So you can actually customize a dashboard or report based on that, what you want to see. And you can filter even the project pipeline to see that. So it makes a lot of these efficiencies come into play when you're actually working to get your job done pretty quickly.
And the thing also that I like about it, for when you're a sourcing professional, and I'm a marketing professional, so I love tools that allow me to really dig in and provide the heart of what the service is, because sourcing and procurement and supply chain is not about digging the cost down. It's exposing how you can do the best for the business while working with the stakeholder. And this tool particularly allows you to get it because it really gets in there and everyone can have a conversation around it. And that's where I think the height of collaboration really is,
That is true. It's not just a price or cost down, right? It's total cost of ownership. Sometimes some of the deals that we do, it's primarily getting just favorable terms on the contracts, or even getting a long-term, like depending on where you are. Like specifically at this time, we have a lot of supply chain chip shortages and stuff. So you determine what is the right thing that you need to get from there. So you can collaborate as part of the team chat, and you can collaborate with the stakeholders, and you can, and it's not just our engineering partners. You can collaborate with the legal, privacy, risk, security, a lot of the internal teams, including FP&A, finance, and everyone. You can bring them on board.
And it's like all in there. It's just the best. I love it. Anyway, I could go on and on. Let's get back to the question. Sorry.
Thanks very much. Well, we have a question here about data, so do brace yourself for that. So somebody here who says, aggregating historical data from across the P2P process and from different systems inevitably involves data quality challenges. How would you recommend those are best overcome to provide reliable reporting and MI?
You want me to take it, Michaela?
Yes.
There is no easy answer to this. It's, if I were to say this, garbage in, garbage out. So it doesn't matter whether you're digitizing this through WSS or anything else. If you don't have the right set of data in, you're not going to get the right output. So obviously, when you're migrating data over from multiple systems into something, you have to invest time to make sure which are the ones that you need to correct, because some of them could be really stale, old data that you probably don't need to bring on board. And that's a time that you can actually invest and bring some efficiencies in there, because a lot of legacy information, historical information probably is not needed if you haven't used it for a very long time. So you may want to take a reality check about how you want to get the data in, because to be honest, automation is not going to help clean up the data. So you have to put in the effort to clean up the data. and you have to invest the time. But what it can do is, if you're investing in a system or in a tool that you want to optimize and make it the single source of truth, that's when probably it's a good time for you to actually invest and clean up the data, bring some data efficiencies in there. So you make it cleaner, and going forward, put some rules and processes in place for you to capture the right data, which are all the mandatory fields, and you can configure it. WSS is extremely easy to configure which ones you can make it mandatory and which ones you need to capture it from the user. So I would suggest that although there's no easy way to frame this, but that's probably a right way to look at things.
Thank you very much. Now, we've got a number of questions here, which I would say are quite technical around the WSS platform. So I'm going to put them to you, and I'm going to caveat this by saying that if Rajiv and Michaela can't necessarily get into the detail of it now, I'm sure we can come back to people separately and answer some of those questions. But let's fire through a few of the more technical ones. So somebody here asking, how does Workday handle process conformance or compliance, I suppose, is another way of expressing that.
But one thing that we do have is we use WSS to track metrics and SLAs. We have set up separate. You can configure your tool to actually track some of the SLAs, and we have SLAs to track how long it takes for a sourcing event, how long it takes from legal, privacy. It really depends on what you want to track and what you want to measure the conformance. It's like first you need to start reporting out. Monitor, refine, report. You have to keep doing that in a process where you want to track those analytics, right? And we have done that for us as any sourcing professional would be very interested in. It's the number of projects that you want to balance your workload for your team, but also you want to understand for all the sizable spend where you need to focus on, like how much of a savings are you driving. So that's a constant one that you want to keep in mind. But other than that, you can actually customize to what all analytics that you want to track and put some mandatory rules around what you want to track and how you want to go about doing it. Again, you can overdo it, which becomes a problem, but that's where you need to clearly define. I would suggest work with the customer support manager with WSS, can help you implement certain practices, best practices across all customers. Probably Michaela can answer better than I can with many of the customers, what they have implemented, and then go from there, like if you want to go with this change. Michaela, you want anything to add?
And the only other thing I would add is that the product does, if you're looking for more data controls on a risk or security level, the data that you do know who has access to what areas. So like, for example, if you were concerned about contracts, you have a way to control who's going into what area of the tool, where they're invited and where they're not invited. And then obviously if you did an audit, you'd know who had controls of what parts and pieces. So I don't know what the data question was looking towards, if it was looking more for a security risk compliance or, as Rajiv shared, but it has the ability to go in and frankly, if you look at it, the data control is so much stronger than emailing. Emailing a sheet around or using a sheet that's up in the cloud is not data control, really. And we all, see companies that are doing that, but this allows you to have everything all in one focused area. And if you do need to run an audit, everything is right there. So it hits a lot of the compliance regulation parts and pieces overall.
Thank you. A couple of people, and this is related to it, a couple of people asking specifically about risk. One person asking, how does WSS manage risk? And another person talking about the fact that the pandemic has increased the focus on risk management and saying, is risk assessment or management part of the Workday suite? And I think you've touched on that, but is there any more to maybe expand on with risk potentially?
There are. So the risk could be factored in different ways, right? One is the privacy, compliance, security risk, or it could also be just the supplier risk, right? So there are two different modules. Like if for any of the project pipeline itself, we have templates, we have work with your customer support manager. That's probably best how you want, what kind of templates. There are default templates that you can use as a risk questionnaire that you can send out to the suppliers, and they fill it so you can screen what kind of data that you are, again, all these are whether it's PII data, what customer data, how you are segmenting all those things, you can actually categorize that. In addition, there is a supplier management piece, which I think Michaela touched upon when she was talking about the different modules in there. You can actually assess the supplier risk as well, which could be an input by the sourcing managers based on the category, based on where they stand, whether it's pandemic and what they see it. So you can also categorize them as strategic. There are different categories in there. You can actually build that out as well. So there are different parts of the risk that you can actually assess and also store as part of the WSS. So it really depends on what you want to capture and where you want to capture it. And again, best is to work with the customer support manager to see what you want to customize and what you want to use, and you can modify that.
Thank you very much, Rajiv. So somebody here asks, is Workday also a platform as a service? So can customers with the right in-house skills do some of their own integrations?
I'll jump on that.
Yeah.
We had a customer, the one I had spoke of in Australia, that used the product for the pandemic. So they were deemed a company that was a critical one to run, and they did not have our product. They bought the product in March and had it up in 2 weeks. And they had all their contracts in, which were over, I think, 1,200 contracts. And again, using that, that overall to go out and had other teams in there. So they had legal in there, they had finance in there, they had health in there. They also put in a tool that, and in their case, they had been a previous customer at a different company, so they had known all the ways to get in, up and running, and how to use the product. But it can be super fast to implement, and it does allow you to contain, as we've touched on, like contracts, legal documents, risk pieces, answering to sometimes, in the case of Australia, they just had a new law that was mandated a few years before, but went into full effect this March on called modern slavery, that most procurement and sourcing people are dealing with. So either environmental, diversity, any of these types of things. So you can track the suppliers in the supplier management area, and then again, scorecard them. But I do believe, I apologize, I think I got lost in that question. So apologies there.
No, thank you very much, Michaela. Two questions here asking about integration with the broader Workday suite. So one person asking, does Workday leverage its HR tool for stakeholder assignments on contracts and vendors? And another person asking, does Workday provide payroll service suite as a standalone, or is it one of the integrated technologies alongside the spend management system? So again, quite relatively technical questions about the platform. Don't know if you're able to answer either of those directly at the moment.
I have to defer that. That's quite technical, and I would say probably it's outside of my area. Michaela, I don't know whether you are aware of it.
I can speak to sourcing, but payroll, HR, they connect. Workday within its HR suite is connected. We were acquired, and so where our integration is connected through the supplier portal area. So the suppliers can go up and into the Workday database and back down, and Rajiv could probably speak to that. And then in the case of procure to pay, the customers that use that product also use an additional finance product, generally speaking. But that doesn't touch on that other question, and I apologize. It's probably a sales or operational question, honestly.
Yeah, payroll and HR, I don't know how they all integrate. It's probably a sales question.
Yeah.
No, it's fine. Thank you very much. And one last technical one here about, can the contracts be edited and reviewed by general counsel within the contracts tool?
The contracts authoring, so I presume that they're talking about the contracts authoring feature as a proper CLM. Probably Michaela can talk about it, whether it's in the roadmap and stuff. What we used was just bringing them on board. Michaela, if I'm right.
Right. So I don't really want to, because we are a public company, so I don't want to talk about future parts and pieces. So, but the contracts piece is a repository. It does allow you to do some REN lighting, I believe. Rajiv could get into that, and then how an organization uses it. Again, it's probably Rajiv could speak to how organizations use them internally, but.
Currently, we did only as a contracts repository at this time, and probably it's something, again, we can talk to the product team or the sales team or the contracts authoring piece of it.
Brilliant, thank you very much. So I think we've got through loads of questions from the audience. If there are any final ones, please do send them through. One thing I just wanted to pick up on, though, and Rajiv, perhaps I'll put this one to you first, is just talking about the human side of supplier relationships, because those supplier relationships are absolutely intrinsic to successful sourcing. So how do you keep, in a digital implementation, in a big shift like this, how do you keep the human element at the heart of everything?
That's a great question. I don't think automation or digitalization is going to exclude the human relationship, right? Because relationship is it's extremely important. And one thing I can say is, with this pandemic, definitely it has put us a lot of stress on our supplier relationship. How do you actually continue to manage, even within your teams or your stakeholders and with the external parties? That's something that we have redefined the way we need to connect. And it's all the more important to connect with the suppliers and maintain the relationship. Whether it's a Zoom call or you have that contact, you still need to maintain that. One thing, bringing it back, what we do is the supplier business reviews, which again can be captured in WSS. Right, we do that. What we do is still, it's in a virtual video conferencing environment, but we do bring the suppliers and we have that relationship along with the stakeholders and stuff. So it does put everything in a virtual setting, but we have that still going on. It doesn't, what we have found is with the pandemic, usually if it's going to be a half-day session or even 3 hours, we actually condense it down because it's quite painful for everyone to sit in for a 3-hour or a half-day session. To go through that. Instead, when you actually go back in person, then you can actually have the human interaction while using some of these platforms to read out, right? So I don't think the human relationship and the interactions will go away. It'll remain. It'll just utilize those things rather than everyone looking into their laptops, trying to see which spreadsheet, what are the information, that you can have a centralized tool in which you are looking at those same information, and then you can actually present it from there. So I think it's a different way of looking at things. I don't think that goes away at all.
And I would add, when I think about over the years of working and collaborating and being within different businesses, the one thing that I truly love about having SaaS-based tools is that you can access it anytime and have that information in front of you. So if you do, and using the pandemic as an example, if you were, in the very beginning, we all we're still have a high level of anxiety, but in the very beginning, there was so much unknown. And so if you all of a sudden needed to look at a contract, you could look at it. If you're CFO or the executive board that was really digging through, like, what were the priority contracts? How can we, change what we need to change? They can dig into all of that and look at it, if they have the ability to do that, right? So you set up the controls. Like, everyone can't just dive in and look at things, but if the controls are set for that person, they can go in and easily look at things. And I remember one of our customers, Bain, where they brought in actually their specialists that go in, basically and work with their customers, and they all dug into the product. They didn't normally do that. They have a regular procurement team, but because of that critical need right up front. They brought everyone in, and it was easy for someone who was not normally in the tool to just dive in, look at a contract, look what was going on. And we all know, as the pandemic hit too, before the let's say the United States was shut down, I remember, talking to different professionals across the globe, right? That everyone was moving their suppliers around as the different parts of the world were starting to shut down, not realizing it was going to be a full global piece. And so by having SaaS-based tools, and not just in a pandemic, but in general, it does help everyone move faster. It gets us away from doing manual tasks. And again, like when I started working, we didn't even have you had desktops. You had to go to your office. You don't have to do that anymore, which is wonderful when you have to answer something really quickly.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Michaela. Let's see if we can squeeze in one final technical question here, which is somebody who's got a question around migration. And they say, our contracts are stored in a few repositories along with the metadata. Can you outline what's involved in migrating the documents and metadata to the Workday platform?
I cannot answer that question, but I know it can be done. So
that's quite technical, I should say.
Thank you for that question.
Well, we may be able to pick up with people afterwards potentially if we want to talk about some of the more technical aspects. Thank you both very much for your time. Let me just before we close, let me come to you for any final thoughts, any reflections that you want to add to what you've said today.
Michaela?
The reflection I always add, but it truly is, I am forever grateful that procurement and sourcing exist. And I felt so secure when we were going into the pandemic, from listening to all our customers, working through, and it's a fabric, it's a whole team effort, really. You might all be at different companies, but you're sourcing and using each other's products and tools, and you all know this. And it's just a really wonderful community. So thank you.
And thank you, Michaela. That is music to my ears as a procurement professional. So thank you very much for that. And definitely, I would say having a single source of truth helps quite a bit, and bringing efficiencies. And that to me is a huge win as a procurement professional, rather than, especially when organizations change, people leave, new people come in. I don't need to go back and see why something was done or where are all these things stored. In my opinion, that is a huge win.
Thank you very much. So the recording of today's webinar will be available shortly if you want to come back and watch it again or share it. In the meantime, it just remains for me to thank Rajiv and Michaela very much for your time and for your expertise today. Thank you to the audience for your excellent questions, and thank you all for logging on today and sharing your time with us, and enjoy the rest of your day.